Hi, podcast listeners. This is your host, Debbie Pecor, and I'm so excited to bring you our episode for today. If you are a first-time listener or a listener who has been with me since day one and you love what I'm doing, I want to encourage you to support the podcast by giving a small donation. I love bringing you new faces and interviews, but it does take time and resources to do it. And any support you'd be willing to give goes towards website upkeep, travel, time, and costs, and would help me greatly to keep doing what I'm doing. Give your support by going to paypal.me/Faces of Grand Prairie. Today I welcome Mr. Robin Brown. Robin is a proud 1972 graduate of Grand Prairie High School and has a long history with the city of Grand Prairie. His family were some of the first morticians in the city, and he followed in their footsteps by becoming a funeral home director and has been in the business himself over 40 years. Robin also has a very interesting hobby. He runs JFK Custom Tours in Dallas, Texas, where he gives tours of the Kennedy Assassination in a restored Lincoln Contentinental convertible that resembles the one JFK rode in on that fateful day. You can find more about his story on the Netflix travel series Dark Tourist. It's episode 3 if you'd like to check it out. It's a really fun spot to watch. Mr. Brown talks about so many interesting topics with us today, including some history into Grand Prairie's funeral homes, a history into some sports stats of Grand Prairie High School, and a look into some of the strong women of Grand Prairie that were instrumental in its founding and growth. My mom, Debbie Pecor, joins me today in this episode that I thoroughly enjoyed with Robin Brown. Happy listening. Okay, so we are here on a rainy day at the Grand Prairie Tourist Information Center, which is off of Beltline, over just a little bit north of I-30, and I'm here with a special guest, Mr. Robin Brown. Hello, how are you, Robin?
I'm great, Jenna.
And I'm here also with a special guest, my mother, Debbie Pecor, who says she's not going to talk, but I think that we could probably get her to.
We're going to coerce her.
That's exactly right.
Join in.
And the reason that my mom is here with me today is because Robin and my mom graduated from high school together from Grand Prairie High School in 1972. And so
48 years.
Say, what was that?
48 years.
48 years.
But your mother was the youngest person in the class. so.
See, he's already winning points. So this is why I wanted to have him on. But Robin has a very interesting history and has gone back a long way with Grand Prairie. And so I just asked him and he said yes. And I even missed the day and he still came back even though I missed it. So I really appreciate you doing that for me.
I'm glad to be here, Jenna.
Isn't this building beautiful?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I've never been in this building, but it's first class.
It is. It's really
Sarah's
nice.
Great.
Sarah is nice, and she is so wonderful. And after we get done here, I told her I'm going to do a little video just with her, kind of showing me around a little bit because it's a beautiful city.
Yes, it's worth seeing.
I mean, a beautiful center, but we're here in the conference room. They let us have it for free, and apparently this room is for anyone's use for the public. So, and it doesn't cost anything.
It's pretty nice.
Yes. So you actually traveled back over here. You don't live in Grand Prairie right now, but you did grow up in Grand Prairie, yes?
Yes.
And so you graduated in 1972. And how long did you stay here after you graduated?
Yes.
You did.
I wasn't run out of town till 1980. But I was born and raised Grand Prairie. Get to high school, and I start meeting some of the tough kids from Lee Junior High.
He's saying that because my mom is giggling because mom went to Lee and he did not go to Lee.
And the Lee kids straightened out the Adams kids pretty quick. And I started doing things their way because your mother told me I was going to. But anyway, go through high school, great experience. Nice thing about high school, you know, when you're in elementary school and even a little later in junior high, you're kind of isolated to the part of town you live in.
Very true. Very, very true.
And now you're going to have to try to keep me on the path, Jenna, because I'm going to. Right now, I've got a Don Marshall story on my mind, Deb. But your mother went through school in junior high and then on to high school with a guy named Don Marshall. Famous gopher, legendary athlete, Grand Prairie. Don Marshall. And on he was, I tended to hold up athletic heroes above scholarly role models. So Don Marshall was a big deal to me when ninth graders were still in junior high.
Gotcha, okay.
Valentine's Day for my ninth grade year, this would be Valentine's 1969. I've got a date. I'm actually double dating with a friend, and we end up at Kip's. Has your mother told you where Kip's was?
Yes, and actually, one of my big things that I'm trying to get done is I know that Kip went on a lot of Big Boy went on a lot of adventures. And so I was talking to Officer New one day, and he was mentioning something about Big Boy. And I was like, you know what? I heard Big Boy goes on a lot of trips. So I'm really hoping that somebody from y'all's class will start talking about some adventures they took Big Boy on.
Oh, you mean Mom's tight-lipped about Big Boy?
No, not necessarily her. I know it was several classes where he went. Yes,
several.
Exactly.
Travel.
So.
Well, okay. I'm about to turn 15 years old. I'm on a date, which makes me a little anxious. We're closing out the evening at Kip's, and I look up, and the bus boy on duty is Don Marshall. And I can't believe this guy that can jump over tall buildings and run like Zeus is working at Kip's. And I tell the group I'm with, that's Don Marshall, and they all say, fine. And they go back to, and I said, well, I've got to go talk to him. So I went up to Don. You probably don't know this. I went up to Don. I said, you don't know me. I'm Robin Brown. I'm from the other side of town. Would you sign this piece of paper for me, Don? And it might have been his first autograph because he was 15 years. Somebody's asking him for his autograph.
Wow.
He signed a piece of paper for me. Now that's how eccentric I was, Jenna. You want to hear all the dark things. So I get Don Marshall's autograph, stuck it in my wallet, and it stayed there for many years.
Oh, wow.
At the 40th reunion of the 69 Gophers, whom Debbie Pecor was a vital member of, I go to that reunion.
Shout out to my dad.
Well,
he'll be here in a little bit.
Well, that's great. And as I told you, my friend Tom and I, we crashed that reunion. Yeah. At that reunion, Cat Quick Don Marshall is there with his wife, Linda. Now, Don and Linda have been married since 1972.
Wow.
Everybody thought that marriage would not last because they were kids, but it lasted. And they raised 3 children, and I learned at the reunion in 2009 of the Gopher reunion that Don and Linda's 3 children all graduated from college. And in 1972, no one would have predicted that. And when they told me that, I started weeping. I thought, how much did they have to overcome?
True.
Teenage parents.
Absolutely.
To end up with 3 college graduates. I mean, it made me weep. And I said, Don, watch this. And I pull out of my wallet the piece of paper. And so I'm showing him this 42, 43 years later. And he had no memory of signing the white punk an autograph at Kip's. I guess it wasn't as big a deal to Don as it was to me. But anyway, okay, so I've brought Don Marshall full circle, 1969, 2009. I'm sorry, Jenna. I go off in different directions.
Well, you know, one thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is a lot of things happened in 1969 in Grand Prairie because that's the first year that South had its first class, right? So did y'all lose a lot of friends to move over there?
I lost none. I bet Deb did. Because, see, Lee divided.
Right.
But John Adams, we didn't have anybody go to South.
You had a choice where we were.
Yeah.
You had a choice.
You know,
some kids went, some kids didn't.
And so at the time, Lee went all the way up to 9th grade?
All of them did.
So only high school.
You don't get to high school till your 10th grade. So Deb, they even gave Adams the option. I remember somebody.
Oh, okay.
an assembly, and they gave us the option,
go.
but everybody at Adams wanted to be a Gopher.
Yeah.
So,
and my sister was a Gopher. I wanted to be a Gopher, so.
of course. So we follow our roots.
And is this also the first year that they started, where Dalworth also switched over? Was
No,
it 60?
no, integration occurred in 66. In the fall of 66, integration occurs.
Okay, all right.
They came to Lee.
The Dalworth students came
Yeah.
to Lee. Okay.
We knew all those kids when we got to high school. We just went to high school with them.
Don,
see.
Alvis, Stan, the group of African American students that became part of mine and your mother's class were far and away just exemplary, just outstanding human beings, ended up being fine adults. And now your mother, I'm sure by the time she's going to junior high, she's in an integrated environment, but I wasn't. Sophomore year at Grand Prairie High School, fall of 1969, is the first time I'm integrated.
Wow.
And I embraced it. When I was younger, some of my biggest sports heroes were Dallas Cowboys, and some of them were African American.
Right.
Dallas. So, but I'm not around. I don't have any African Americans in my world until September of '69 when I get to Grand Prairie High School, and I don't know. I just embraced it.
Yeah. And when was the first year that y'all had a North-South football game?
The Gophers and the Warriors didn't play each other for a number of years because South's enrollment to begin with was just a few hundred.
Oh, okay.
They started out like 3A.
Uh-huh.
And the Gophers and you tell us, Deb, the Gophers and the Warriors didn't start playing until maybe the mid-'70s.
And it wasn't even football that was the first sport. I've heard it was the basketball team. The girls' basketball team was the first actual Warrior Gopher.
That may be true.
I think your dad would say it was the first girls' flag football.
Oh, probably. Okay, maybe it was.
He was
yeah,
the coach of that.
Whatever it was, it was girls. He was the coach of that.
He was one of the coaches of the first girls' flag football game from Grand Prairie to South.
See, Robin, I learn new things about my parents every day.
Did you know that your dad was a big deal? Have you ever heard that?
Occasionally.
Yeah, okay, well that's good. You need to know. He was a big deal, but he was a humble giant.
Humble giant.
No, you should know your dad's traits. Very modest man, but
that's why when I say I've only heard it a couple times, it's not because my dad says it. My dad will say, "Oh, it wasn't."
No, you wouldn't hear it from him.
No,
but Deb and I know he was a pillar. I'm not exaggerating. He was a pillar of the student body in the community. Somebody I looked up to. But
so growing up, your dad.
My dad's the town undertaker.
Your dad was the town undertaker.
My dad isn't funeral director.
Is that really what his official title was?
100 years ago. Today, someone in my profession, I followed my dad into funeral service. The title of my profession today is funeral director.
Okay.
Everything evolves. Mortician, undertaker, funeral director. I followed my parents into funeral service. But my mother's family operated the funeral home here in Grand Prairie.
Okay.
Now, I think that's the building that your mother's talking about at the intersection of today, right now. You can drive to the intersection of Northeast 5th Street and Main, and you would be looking at the northeast corner of that intersection at the Guerrero Dean Funeral Home.
Yes.
You drive by it all the time.
Yes.
That building was built in 1941 by my mother's aunt and her husband. There were two Turner brothers that ran Grand Prairie 100 years ago. G.H. Turner. Parks are named for him. Pools are named for him. He ran the Grand Prairie State Bank, and his brother L.O. Turner ran a hardware store and a funeral home, which was called a mortuary.
Okay, that explains why I see Turner, because I look in a lot of newspapers from newspaper.com, a lot of digitized newspapers, and I see the Turner, but sometimes it's hard for me to go back there and make sense of which one was which and who is So I knew that G.H. Turner was State Bank. So I saw him on all those advertisements. What's funny is that I was actually in Rotary with the woman that runs the funeral home as it is now.
Well, tell me her name.
Okay, her name is...
you're talking about Sylvia Dean.
Yes, I'm talking about Sylvia. And so she actually posted something.
She did Mrs. Bench's funeral.
She posted something about that building. She said, I found a spot in here that I didn't know existed. And it was some kind of something that where she got into the bottom. I don't know if it was to get into the foundation or something, but it didn't look like that to me. And she was like, I just would wonder what this was used for. But now that you said that your family built it, now I'm curious.
Sylvia and her husband Mark conducted the funeral of the mother of a dear friend of ours.
They're very sweet, yes.
But I'd never met them until the day of Bet Benji's funeral 4 months ago. Okay, so I had a conversation with Sylvia, and she said, you need to come to the building and explore this and help me with this.
Oh, that's so neat.
It is neat. And I said, of course I will. That building was built in 1941. G.H. Turner, the banker. His brother, L.O. Turner, the merchant, hardware store, undertaker. He's in the building that is at the northwest corner of Main and Center, and it used to be a Zales, and then it was you go in there and borrow money. That was the L.O. Turner hardware store. But he performed funerals out of that building until 1941, when he goes 4 blocks east to Northeast 5th and Main and builds that building that is today the Guerrero Dean Funeral Home. 1941. And what made that building unique in 1941, not many towns had a freestanding building that was a funeral home. Most funeral operations were still being conducted out of a hardware store.
Out of a hardware store?
Here's the thing. 100 years ago, every town has a mercantile store, hardware, general items, general store.
Right.
And that merchant would sell wooden coffins. And when the family had a death, the family would come in. There's no mortuary. There's no embalming. The person that has just lost dad will come in the hardware store, purchase a coffin, in this case from Mr. Turner, take the coffin home, put dad or granddad in the coffin, and bury him. Eventually, morticians become that entity in town, and L.O. Turner was Grand Prairie's first mortician / undertaker / funeral director. His wife, L.O. Turner's wife, Minnie V. Turner, was my grandfather's sister.
Okay.
Who's that?
That's my dad.
Let's get him in here.
Yeah,
can we do that? You're the host of the show.
Yeah, well, I told him he needs to come inside. I don't know what
Can I stand up and hug him
go
during the
right
podcast?
Please.
I'm going to stand up during the podcast and hug old number 74. No.
Dad, he was just explaining to me that before we had funeral homes, the people that ran the hardware store were where people would go to get their coffins, and they were the ones that did that until L.O. Turner started one in 1941. I was like, that's crazy. So
Grand Prairie history, man. This is awesome that you're joining the podcast. Pecor, number 74, is joining the podcast. The Houston Cougar. This is an honor. Okay, now I didn't get his autograph in the 9th grade. I just got Don Marshall's autograph. I'll get to that later.
So at what point did your dad...
Good question.
Did they do that right?
She's very good at getting me back on the path, David. I get out in the rough. That's her job. Okay. The Turners build the building that we've been talking about at 5th and Main, 1941. Now you have a freestanding building. That's the funeral home in the town. Funeral homes in every town in America ran ambulance service. Emergency ambulance service. And no one in America ever thought, wait a minute, that's a conflict of interest that the undertaker is rushing grandmother to the hospital. And he may not be that interested in grandmother surviving the trip to the hospital.
Well, nobody thought that the hardware store was a conflict of interest, that you bought your coffin at the hardware store.
That's true. See, we're taking you back into the history of funeral service.
Our episode today is brought to you by Anita Potts, your local Scentsy consultant. To say that I love Scentsy and am a bit obsessed with their products would be an understatement. Scentsy offers a variety of products for home and personal fragrance. Not only do they have a variety of wickless home fragrance options like warmers, diffusers, and sprays, but they have the absolute cutest gifts options because they partner with companies like Disney and universities that allow all of our personalities to shine through in their products. Their newest line includes pods and fan diffusers that don't use heat. In my opinion, Scentsy has the very best fragrances available on the market. They're affordable and adorable, and I am a loyal Scentsy customer with a warmer in every single room of my home. Your local consultant, my friend Anita Potts, has opened a link for you to purchase all of your newest Scentsy items, and any and all commission that she makes off this link until May will be donated to the Grand Prairie Homeless Outreach Organization. That means anything that you buy not only goes towards freshening your home for spring, but also freshens someone's day who might need the help through this organization. Find the link on this episode's notes or on the Faces of Grand Prairie Facebook page. I want to thank Anita for her willingness to help a great cause, and if you'd like to use her for any of your future Scentsy needs, you can find her on Facebook at Anita Potts.
No one, no one's families ever thought, gee, is that a conflict of interest that the undertaker is rushing grandmother to the... Okay. That all changed in the 1970s.
Oh, okay.
Ambulance service was not a money-making proposition for funeral homes.
Right.
Funeral homes would lose money because some people couldn't pay the debt.
Right.
And funeral homes did it because it created goodwill.
Mm-hmm.
In 45 years ago, funeral homes all over America went to their county commissioners or their city councils and said, we're not going to do this anymore. You're going to have to provide emergency service. So that's why today we see the big white box ambulances that are all operated either by fire department, city, municipality, or individual firm. Funeral homes provided that service until 45 years ago. In our lifetimes, that changed.
So I'm sitting here thinking to myself, are you getting taken to the hospital in the back of a hearse?
No, it was actually an ambulance.
Oh, it's actually an ambulance.
A funeral home would have a fleet of ambulances, but they were just station wagons.
Right, they weren't.
The big box things weren't created till 40 years ago. Anyway, I don't know that you wanted me to go there.
No. I think that's
Jenna.
Fascinating because I think that goes into a lot of just how things come to be, which to me is very interesting. So
how does my dad get involved?
Yes.
My mother was Sue Robertson. So it's my mother's aunt and uncle that are L.O. and Minnie V. Turner, the undertakers. And as a young woman, she's the funeral home secretary. I have a picture of my mother and L.O. Turner and all of his employees posed in front of that building. But I didn't bring it with me because I knew you were only giving us an hour. She's only giving us an hour, Dave. And we couldn't get to that picture. But anyway, after World War II, now my dad's up in Gainesville, 67 miles away.
okay.
He's driving an ambulance for a funeral home in Gainesville. My dad's attracted to funeral service because he likes red lights and sirens. He wants to be a firefighter, and he does become a firefighter, but he realizes if he goes to work for the local funeral director in Gainesville, he can get in the ambulance with sirens and red lights, and he also learns that girls like that. Okay. After World War II, my dad comes to the Dallas Institute of Mortuary Science, downtown Dallas, and becomes a licensed funeral director. Now he's looking for his next opportunity, and he learns that Mr. and Mrs. Turner here in Grand Prairie are reaching retirement age, and they want to sell an interest in their business to someone younger. My dad comes out, they meet, they strike a deal, he buys an interest in their business, 1948.
Wow.
Well, that's a presidential election year, and at some point that year, my dad and Mrs. L.O. Turner get in an argument about the Dewey-Truman presidential race, and the argument gets so intense that my dad says, well, you give me my check back and you'll never see me again, and he leaves over the 48 presidential election.
Oh, my word.
But he remembered the funeral home secretary. Your mother knew what I was And he even had her phone number. And so thank God for me that he kept calling on the funeral home secretary, and the rest is history.
Wow.
So that's how my dad got ingrained into funeral service in Grand Prairie.
So how old were you? So was it your entire life that he had that business? Because you said it was 48. So.
Well, that's 48. I'm born in 54. My dad, now you understand there's a funeral home operation in Arlington called Moore's.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Because my dad got in the fight with Mrs. Turner and took his check and left, the Turners end up selling to the Moores, because Hugh Moore in Arlington, who was the same age as the Turners, they were all born in the 1800s. Hugh Moore has 3 sons that have just come back from World War II, and they all need a job. And so Hugh Moore decides we better expand. So he bought out my aunt and uncle.
Okay.
And that, what is Guerrero Dean, becomes the Moore Funeral Home as of 1948. They outgrew that funeral home. They go down here to Small Hill and Beltline Road and build that red brick building that is now the Grand Prairie Baptist Church.
Okay, now I know exactly where you're talking about. Yes, okay.
And that becomes the Moore Funeral Home in 1955.
Okay.
My dad gets out of funeral service for a while because my dad was, when my parents got married, they were living above a funeral home in downtown Dallas.
Oh.
My mother becomes pregnant and she says, I'm not going to raise a child above a funeral home. And my dad gets out of funeral service and decides to get a normal job. But in the late 50s, my dad wants to go back into funeral service. He misses the red lights and the sirens. In the meantime, he joins the Grand Prairie Fire Department as a volunteer, along with Lee Herring and a bunch of other corruptible type businessmen. But anyway, we don't have time for that story, Jenna, thank goodness. But my dad gets back in, he wants to get back in, and he buys the Moore's Grand Prairie location, that red brick building, from the Moores, and my dad starts operating that as the Moore Brown Funeral Home, 1961.
So where did you live in Grand Prairie?
905 Northwest 9th Street,
Okay.
3 doors up from Melissa Anderson Binge. And when I was 14 in 1968, my parents built a house on Robertson Road, a few blocks away. So I lived in Grand Prairie 26 years. I lived in one house for 14 years. I lived in another house for 12 years. But my high school years, when I got corrupted by those Lee kids, I was on Robertson Road. Got my house wrapped a bunch of times by some Lee. We never know for sure. No lie detectors were used. But anyway, I was run out of Grand Prairie in 1980. By this period of time, my dad's competitors are the Bean Massey Burge Funeral Home. Bean Massey Burge bought my dad out in 1979. My dad had always wanted to go back to Gainesville. Grand Prairie was my mother's home.
Gotcha.
My dad wanted to go back to Gainesville. My dad purchased a funeral home in Gainesville in 1975. For 4 years, he continued to operate both. I joined my dad in the funeral business. In 79, my dad negotiates to sell his funeral home here, the Bean Massey Burge. And we basically are run out of Grand Prairie.
This has nothing to do with Grand Prairie history, but I'm curious. Do you know at what time between 1941 and in the 70s was it a requirement for morticians to
have
get
a license? To be a licensed entity.
And not just a hardware store salesperson.
Early 1900s.
So you actually did have to have, well, that's when a license was available.
L.O. Turner. Now, I'm glad you said this. She keeps leading me, Dave, back onto the path. The licensing is important. L.O. Turner becomes one of the first licensed embalmers / undertakers in the state of Texas. And his wife, who was my grandfather's sister, Minnie V. Robertson Turner, becomes one of the first, I think she was like number 3, female embalmers in the state of Texas to be licensed.
Very interesting.
She was one of the first women.
Wow, that's really interesting.
And to go even deeper, probably deeper than you want to go, but you keep asking me these things.
I mean, we still have time.
Her gift was to preserve the body, to embalm the body, to make the body presentable for viewing and eventually a funeral. L.O. Turner was the front man. He liked to wait on families. He was the business end. She loved to embalm. They made a great team.
Wow.
But she was one of the first.
That's very interesting.
She was born in 1895. Now, I'm talking about my grandfather's sister, Minnie V. Robertson Turner. She was born in 1895. L.O. Turner was born in 1886, so he was 9 years older than her. Mm-hmm. Did the Pecors know that the Turner brothers, G.H. Turner the banker and L.O. Turner the undertaker, came here from Greenville about the turn of the century?
Really?
Yes. When I say the turn of the century, 1900.
Right. Not the recent turn of the century.
That's right.
Yes.
Now we're in another century. I haven't been brought into that century yet, Jenna. But anyway, the Turners established a professional entity here. You need to be licensed if you're going to do that.
Right.
And so we moved the wooden coffins out of the back of every town's hardware store, and we started creating funeral homes.
Wow. So I'm assuming that they resolved their 48 presidential argument at some point along the way.
Oh, they became very chummy later in life. Well, see, once he marries the funeral home secretary, they patched things up.
I see. Well, it's interesting because I'm getting really interested in the archival of historic documents. And one of those things is newspapers. Obviously, they're very important. And so there's a period of time during the 40s when the Grand Prairie papers did not, for whatever reason, there was not a digitized version. And so I've always been curious about Grand Prairie during World War II and how that kind of affected us as a city. But I'd have to go to Dallas to actually get the copies of the original paper.
I can believe that.
Yeah.
I can tell you from a funeral director's perspective, all the men go off to the war.
The 48 fight was not in any of the papers I saw. So.
No, that was just an inter-family quarrel.
But that's why it's important to tell these stories.
But
because that is a part of the history.
But you might come across a headline at some point that Turners sell their funeral home to the Moors of Arlington.
Right.
You might come across that. So, that was 1948, shortly after Mrs. Turner's blow up with my dad. They were both very strong-minded people, what can I say? But staying on the World War II thing, everybody goes off to war. My mother morphs from being the funeral home secretary to making ambulance calls. And she didn't sign up for that, but she gets pressed into service because not all the men, but a lot. So my mother and Mrs. Turner, they would make ambulance calls, and my mother got pulled into duty.
See, this is making me want to do a whole nother women part of
Women of Grand Prairie.
Women of Grand Prairie, because we know about Miss Ruthie, but there's a lot of other women that had really.
Listen, Ruthie Jackson, a walking icon of Grand Prairie. I'll share this with you. Mrs. Turner, the first female embalmer, she had a younger sister, Gertie Robertson Couch. So Gertie was a civic-minded person, and she married Earl J. Couch, and 1920. There was no. You're gonna like this, I think. There was no library in Grand Prairie. Mrs. Turner's sister, Mrs. Couch, another sister of my grandfather, she would get on the interurban with a friend of hers. They would take empty suitcases to the Grand Prairie. This may be discussed at the Women's Club of Grand Prairie. They would take empty suitcases to the Central Dallas Library, check out books, bring the books back in suitcases to the lean-to shack that was Grand Prairie City Hall in the 1920s. And people learned through word of mouth, no cell phones, that they could come to the little city hall, which was where Leedy's insurance building was, and they could rent out books. Wow. And so Gertie Couch and this other lady were literally creating the Grand Prairie library system. The books would be read, they would load them up in the suitcases, take the interurban back to downtown Dallas, check them back in, check out more books, bring more. That's how Grand Prairie's library system began. And when the library celebrated their 100th anniversary, Gertie Couch was still alive. Now, I'm talking about Mrs. Turner's younger sister. Mm-hmm. Gertie Couch lived to be 105 and a half years old. Wow. She was 56 when I was born, and she's still alive when I'm 50. Wow. And she died in 2004, and my 15-year-old son was a pallbearer at her funeral. Wow. But anyway, literally she founded the Grand Prairie Library System, and on the 100th anniversary of Grand Prairie's library system, they honored her. She was still alive, and she was part of the ceremony. Wow. So now I've dragged Minnie V. Turner's baby sister into this because that was significant.
Absolutely.
She also founded the Grand Prairie Study Club.
Okay.
Which was a women's organization.
Yeah. There was another club that kept coming up in the newspaper, and I can't remember what it was, but I've always, maybe I'll think of it, but there's organizations that we don't have anymore. A lot of organizations that used to be, but we don't have anymore. But this one was something that I was like, what is that? What do they do? But I'll have to think of it.
Well, your mother could help you with. Deb, does the Grand Prairie Study Club still exist?
No.
Okay.
No.
When she founded that, now see, the Women's Club of Grand Prairie didn't come into existence until 1968. Mm-hmm. Before that, it was the Grand Prairie Study Club, and it was women who would come together, determined to better their community. Well, your mother should have been in that generation because these women were very independent women, and they weren't content to stay in the home. And they did things like found the library. They did things. And
they had their own chapter of the Chamber of Commerce, and they had all the, women were definitely a big part of the history of this town.
Rightfully so.
And I don't know if that's typical or if it was atypical for the time, but
I don't know. Well, but I looked at Gertie Couch as ahead of her time as far as if something needed to be done, she didn't go ask a man's permission. She just did it. Now, I'll give you an interesting story on her. The old high school was a brick building that sat across the street from the gym of Lee Junior High. Oh, you knew that.
Yeah.
When Gertie Robertson she's starting her senior year of high school. She was born in 1898, so this would be 1915, 1916. The building becomes condemned by the county health inspector as unsafe.
Really?
Yes. So rather than my great aunt, she was actually my grandmother, but Gertie Robertson, rather than being interested in finishing and getting her high school degree, she just never goes back because the building was condemned. And she got on the interurban and went to downtown Dallas and got a job as a sales clerk at, I've got to get the name right, Harris Brothers.
Okay.
Which eventually became Sanger Harris. And she would get on the interurban, go downtown, work at Sanger's, sell whatever, and come home. One more story, if you'll allow me, because this is what you're paying me to do.
Yeah, exactly. First, tell me though, the interurban you keep referring to. I don't tell listeners what that is.
That's a train.
Okay.
Your parents know that.
That went from where? Grand Prairie to Dallas?
Yes, or to Waco, or to Abilene, or I shouldn't say interurban. She'd get on the train because nobody had cars. Nobody could afford cars.
Right.
One more story on Gertie, and then I promise I'll let you move on.
You're fine. This is very interesting to me. So
Gertie gets interested in a young man named Earl Couch Sr. He goes off to World War I. He comes back from World War I, and he continues calling on Gertie Robertson. He invites her out. He has a car. This is about 1919.
Oh.
He's back from the war, and he has a car.
Does it have sirens and bells too?
No. Although Earl Couch, her husband, eventually was an embalmer for the Yellow Turner funeral. It was a family operation, Jenna. So yes, Gertie's husband eventually is an employee of her sister's funeral home, and he became an embalmer. But anyway, on this night in 1919, she's inviting. He has invited 21-year-old Gertie Robertson out on a date. They're going to go to downtown Dallas to the Majestic Theater to see a movie, and the Majestic Theater is still sitting there.
Wow. That's a special date right there.
Well, yeah, you could drive by right now and see the Majestic Theater on Elm Street. Okay, he's driving her downtown Dallas, and when they get to Chalk Hill, you understand Highway 80 was the only way to get to Dallas.
That's Highway 80 is actually Main Street. Right?
It is.
Yes. A lot of people don't realize it's a highway.
And Gertie knows as they're heading to Dallas, a lot of cars don't make it up Chalk Hill.
Oh, wow.
His car roars up Chalk Hill, and she starts looking at him differently. And I grew up hearing this story. She said, I might need to take a more serious look at Earl because his car roared up Chalk Hill. Okay, they get married. The rest was history. So, Gertie Couch. But these are some people that I grew up listening to about early Grand Prairie.
The spotlight today is on the Grand Prairie Tourist Information Center and Trunk Stop Gift Shop, located at 2170 North Beltline Road. This center is way more than just a tourism center. There are so many resources for planning trips to DFW or even surrounding areas. You can purchase your NTTA toll tag here, as well as purchase combo and discount tickets to attractions here in Grand Prairie, such as Six Flags, Ripley's Believe It or Not, and Epic Waters. There is a conference room that is available for use to the public for free, as well as the cutest gift shop you'll ever see. You can even stop on in for some picture opportunities within the building and outside the building. Catch what is going on with the Tourist Information Center, which is a lot, by finding them on Facebook at Visit Grand Prairie or on their website at visitgrandprairietx.com. Make sure you tell Sarah that the Faces of Grand Prairie sent you. Well, here's the thing: is I've had a lot of conversations recently with Bonnie Cockrum, who is the Grand Prairie Historical Organization. She's the president-elect, and we were talking about how necessary it is to hear exactly what you're doing right now. Is you're telling the history of your family, and you're telling when you're doing that, you're mentioning places, dates, when people actually came into ownership of certain things. That's all part of the history too, and it's really important to just sit here and listen to people's stories when they talk about that kind of thing. So it's what you're doing is incredibly important. And actually, as of today, all the podcast episodes are going to go into the archive for the Grand Prairie Historical Organization. Because you don't realize when you're actually in the middle of a conversation, you're actually in the middle of a historical conversation. You might not think about it right now. Yes. But so it sounds like just the way that you talk, history has always been really important to you. Somewhat. Would you agree? A little bit?
Sure.
Well, I mean, obviously you can tell he has just such an aptitude for remembering days.
Absolutely.
And years and events that happen, so it comes naturally.
Just so y'all know, we did not discuss any of this before you came here.
None of
it's
this
not
is
like
scripted?
I've asked you for any of the. No, you just. I didn't even send you questions. So this is all just off the top of your head, which is really astounding to me. So.
Well, one reason Don Marshall became famous is because of some critical blocks provided by a member of your family at important moments. Well, hey, do I have 2 more minutes?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
In this room with us right now at this moment is a person who was a member of the last Grand Prairie Gopher football team to ever beat the Arlington Colts. And Jenna, not in your lifetime, but in our lifetime, that was a big deal. Who wins the Gopher Colt game each year?
So that was the big rivalry back then?
Yes, because each town had one school. Now, by the time your dad was playing football, Arlington had created Sam Houston.
Okay.
But Sam Houston was a fledgling little step school. Mm-hmm. If you were in Arlington, you were a Colt. Mm-hmm. Now, when your dad was playing football for the Gophers, Arlington's population was about 50,000 more than Grand Prairie. Mm-hmm. They were over 100, and we were about 50. But in November of 1969, the Gophers at UTA Field beat the Arlington Colts 16-7. And that never happened ever again, that the Gophers beat the Colts.
Wow.
I've got that game on disc.
Do you really?
Whoa. Well then, can I come home with y'all? Dave, can I? Really?
So was that where y'all played? Because when did the Gopher Bowl come into existence?
1956.
1956. So what were y'all doing playing at UTA?
Well, it was a home game for the Colts.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
The stadium belonged to UTA. The Colts played there. It was just made of metal. It was just, it doesn't exist. If you go find the Olympic swimming pool at UTA's campus, that's where UTA Stadium was. Not the one that's there now. That one was torn down. But the Gophers beat the Colts that night.
That's going to tell you the starting lineup.
Who was the starting lineup?
I bet it's most of it.
Bailey, Bear Saunders, Ricky Carroll, Joe Doucet. Help me, Dave. David Norman. Presley, James Killian. No, Mike Grant. Terry Gearhart and Dozier are the offensive. The line was so good.
Wow.
That they didn't let Pecor be a star till the next year. I mean, he played, but these guys were they all got college scholarships.
I subbed for Dozier on defense.
Grand Prairie produced a lot of athletes.
You were defense as a junior. I'm sorry, Dave.
He was on senior both ways. Never came off the field.
Never came off the field.
Wow.
So, Dave, I'm very impressed with the young lady. But yesterday, I learned, and I know she's a historian. She's never heard of Mike Presley. And I said, well, Jenna, we've got to talk. Anyway, defense, Starr, Scoggins, help me, Nicky Athens, Steve Wade, Bartell, Mark Pringle. But I'm 15, and these guys are immortal to me.
I can understand why. That's pretty cool, Dad.
They beat a city who was a lot bigger than Grand Prairie. Anyway, it never. 3 months ago, I'm getting off the path. I wanted to go to a game in Austin and see the 1969 Texas Longhorns have their 50th anniversary, national champions. And I went. And one day while we're there, Peel and I go pick up Presley, and we drive to Georgetown and have lunch with our 4th grade teacher.
Oh.
I saw a picture of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's never sent me a picture of that.
I saw it on Facebook.
Yeah, well, see, I don't do any of that, and Peel's supposed to send me that. But Presley, your name came up, of course. But when Presley came out of his house that day when we picked him up, he said, I just got off my device with Miss G Pie.
Miss G Pie.
That was a prominent thing. He had just been texting or whatever you do with Farmer. And we said, are you kidding me? You just come out of your house and you just got there talking to Miss G. Now, see, the next year that was Gretchen.
Oh,
But the year before Gretchen, it was a girl named Jan. Anyway.
Shout out to Gretchen.
So Presley and Farmer are communicating with each other. But your name came up, of course. And
I think you're explaining the way that you're talking. I understand more and more about why Grand Prairie has such a strong alumni association, for one, but also just a strong pride for the school as a whole.
Sure.
Because you guys all thought very highly of each other. And when you only have one high school, you don't think about this.
Right.
That's what you look to,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
And so
Sure.
when they built the Gopher Bowl, did it always look the way that it did? Like, not necessarily now, but you mentioned that the Colts played and it was just a metal stadium.
it was inferior to the Gopher Bowl.
Was Gopher Bowl always something that was amazing?
Very special.
Really?
It was patterned after the Cotton Bowl.
Yes.
In a lot of ways.
Oh,
That's a true statement.
Okay.
And it was built in a ravine between rocks.
Okay.
I've seen the pictures.
Is that why it goes down and not
It's
just
below
sitting
ground
on
level.
top? Okay.
They said, let's fill in the ends, and we've got a bowl.
That's also why there's no
Oh.
I never thought about that.
So as athletes, was that something y'all looked forward to, as like to be able to play and go to the Gopher Bowl?
Yeah, it was
Really?
a big deal. It was the finest stadium in Metroplex.
It was amazing.
It was ahead of its time.
So who was in charge of getting all that? Like who
Grand
was
Prairie had a superintendent named H.H. Chambers.
Yes.
And he was strong.
Okay.
Chambers Auditorium. Mm-hmm. Chambers would spend whatever amount of money needed to be spent for Grand Prairie to have first-class facility. Now, you grew up with educators. I mean, but Chambers was the man. Mm-hmm. He spared that H.H. Chambers Auditorium. When that opened in 1964, there was no high school anywhere in the state of Texas that had an auditorium that nice. Now, when you walk in there today, I don't know what you think, but 55 years ago, Jenna, that was state of the art. Right, guys?
Yes, and it sounds like Grand Prairie has continued that pathway to having a lot of state-of-the-art facilities. As a matter of fact, I'm probably going to be going around with a couple of the school board members, and they're going to be touring me around some of the facilities that the Grand Prairie has now, which
awesome.
they've got a greenhouse, they've got a vet tech facility, they've got Grand Prairie High School. If you haven't been in there, they have a nursing school for the kids. So when high school students graduate, they have their associate's degree in nursing, and they've got these, to call them dummies is a way understatement. These are digital mannequins that can have a heart attack, that can have cardiovascular problems. One of them can give birth. They have one that is an autopsy table. It's virtual reality where you can actually work on real people from a virtual reality perspective, which is what Terry Brooks was like, Jenna, you've got to see this table. It's unreal. And I said, I don't understand. He goes, you actually have real bodies that they can work on virtually.
We dissected a frog when I was a sophomore.
Right, exactly. But y'all had a really awesome stadium. So it sounds like Grand Prairie has just always had that mentality.
Chambers started that mentality, Jenna, and you'd have to talk to your parents about why it's still that way. But Chambers got that attitude started.
Okay.
Spare no expense. Athletics, drama, the arts, first class.
So when did Earl Tom Keel come into y'all's school?
50s.
The 50s?
Yes. Y'all remember Leon Breeden?
I don't know Leon Breeden.
The University of North Texas is famous for having the 1 o'clock lab band. They're worldwide 1 o'clock lab band. Musicians from all over the world come from Denton. The man who created that at Denton was a man named Leon Breeden. Before he went to North Texas, he was Grand Prairie High School band director. Mm-hmm. And that's why the band hall is called the Leon Breeden Hall. He's a famous guy. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to keep going until you tell me to stop talking.
Well, I'm going to, because Dad just picked up the picture that you brought in. So we have about 10 minutes, and I definitely would be remiss if I didn't at least mention this, because this is a part of your life, big-time life. So the picture that you brought in today, Robin brought in, was a picture of John F. Kennedy on Highway 80, Main Street, when he was running for president. And a lot of us have seen that picture. It's been at the Brass Bean. There's a lot of people that have seen it. But this picture was taken in what year?
September 13th, 1960.
1960. And so...
And he's running for president.
And he was running for president. And Dad, he pointed out a certain friend of yours.
Do you know there's a man in that picture? That's Marshall's dad.
Mm-hmm. That's Marshall's dad.
There's a classmate of yours.
Well, I heard Paul's in here somewhere.
Yeah, okay. Well, then let's find him. Let's find him. Let's find him. You want me to help?
Well, if you know where to look. Oh, okay.
Hand in the pocket. His mother checked him out of school and said, we're going to go downtown and see this. Is that
He's
cool?
One of the only kids.
Is that cool?
That makes sense why there's no other kids in that picture.
Well, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Lee D. Herring.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Marshall Waters Sr., Marshall's sister, Kay, Mayor James Weems, Majority Leader of the Senate, Sarah T. Hughes, Lady Bird.
Lady Bird.
So,
Look at that.
Wow.
That's a lady.
for those of y'all that, Robin does something very interesting. He has a passion for the history of the John F. Kennedy assassination, and you were actually on an episode of a Netflix special where you talked about your tours that you offer. So this is something that, from what your website says, I'm just reading this, and I know from what my parents have told me, that's just been a passion hobby of yours over the years, is to, you know a lot about the assassination, you know, and you also have you have restored which kind of car?
1963 Lincoln Continental convertible.
That's right. So was this kind of the start of your interest in this, or when did that start?
Well, on the day of the assassination, I'd love to hear y'all's memories, but we've just come back from lunch. Austin Elementary School, our teacher, Ida Lou Collins, is called out of the room. When she comes back in, she's sobbing. I'm sure y'all have similar stories. And soon they sent us all home. And my memories are just next 4 days. Every adult in my orbit is just sitting around a black and white TV. I'm not emotionally involved at all. In 1973, on the 10th anniversary of Kennedy's murder, Burt Lancaster releases a movie. You've heard of Burt Lancaster?
I have. I do know
Nice
Burt Lancaster.
Nice parenting, Dave.
Yeah.
Burt Lancaster releases a movie called Executive Action. It comes out in the fall of 1973. I'm 19 years old. I go in the theater out there just west of Gibson's on 303. I can't remember the name of it. I watch the movie. The movie is explaining that a cabal of industry and finance and big oil wanted to remove Kennedy, and they pull it off, and that's the plot of the movie Executive Action. I walk out of the theater. I'm 19 years old. I think I was with Warder. And I said, well, I've been asleep for 10 years. Well, that movie did something. Now, some members of my family would say it horribly scarred me and altered my trajectory, because some people in my family will say I'm obsessed with the Kennedy murder. I prefer to just say I'm very, very involved.
Yes, passionate.
I don't think obsessed is the right word, Jenna. But anyway, I've devoted a lot of time to it. I've been friends with Paul May for 50 years. I didn't know until 7 years ago that May is intimately involved in studying the murder of John F. Kennedy.
Really?
So late in life, May, and I said, Paul, I never knew. He would never bring it up. I would never bring it up. We discovered that 7 years ago. But May is very knowledgeable. As a matter of fact, a year and a half ago, I don't know what happened, but a year and a half ago, May called me and said, Pecor and Bailey and I are going to come do a tour. Get ready. And I said, okay, let's go. Well, I never heard back from him, so I don't know what happened.
I'm still waiting for him to say, let's go.
What happened, Dave?
I'm really interested in that myself, but like...
And maybe you'll get invited.
That's right, that's right. Well, I'm just... So, do you find, is history, I know that specific part of history is very interesting to you, but like, do you find that you've always been interested in history? Or? Yeah,
but it was an acquired thing, Jenna. When I'm 17, I'm just wanting to go downtown at night and see girls.
Go to Kips.
Yeah. I was not a historian when I was 17 years old. I just had hormones. But later, history became more important to me. Sarah's about to run us out.
Sarah's... That's fine. We're actually getting to the end. So Sarah just walked in with the Grand Prairie Tourist Information Center, and the police are outside having a meeting in here afterwards. So, but Robin, oh my gosh, it was so interesting talking to you.
Jenna, I'm honored
that
you would want to talk to an old man.
Well, I find it very fascinating, and we'll have to meet again just to talk about something else.
We'll talk about the career of David Pecor.
Let's do that.
He changed the trajectory of Gopher football.
Dad is shaking his head.
Before you got here, I told her you were a big deal. I said, Jenna, did you know he was a big deal?
Wasn't the operative word.
Well, okay, we're all has-beens.
Anyway, thank you so much, Robin. I appreciate
Jenna,
your time.
I've enjoyed it very much.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much.